For TRICHOMES.com, I'm Jesse Batend, and this is The High Ground. On this show, we feature leaders of the cannabis industry. We talk to everyone from farmers to CEOs and public officials, anyone making an impact on the cannabis community and beyond. Two of the biggest contributors to climate change are industrial farming and construction. Hemp, on the other hand, is eco-friendly, can be used to build cheap, non-toxic, fireproof buildings, all while literally sucking more carbon out of the air than its slower-growing relative, the tree. Of course, hemp only became fully legal to cultivate 2 years ago with the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill. And between concerns caused by the stigma of cannabis and costly but necessary regulatory hurdles like safety testing, it means that we still have some ways to go before industrial hemp becomes fully mainstream, so to speak. My guest today is the founder of Wafba, or We Are for Better Alternatives, which is a group of companies and organizations dedicated to advocating for, well, it's right there in the name. Morris's interest personally in hemp was sparked back when he was working in the music industry, when he noticed just how much waste was being generated. From there, Morris began a journey that started with him exploring the possibility of creating hemp-based band merch and ended with him becoming a full-blown advocate. So I feel like it's one of the most common questions that people ask musicians is, you know, when you're writing a song, what comes first, like the music or the lyrics, right? It's like question that musicians are always getting. I'm going to ask you kind of a slight variation on that, which is, I know that you grew up on a farm and then you worked in the music industry and now you're in the world of hemp. So like, what came first, farming or music?
I would really say music, because we weren't really farmers. We lived on a 17-acre farm and we had some horses and cows and chickens and geese and dogs and cats. But I was exposed to music early on. My dad was a boogie-woogie piano player and turned on all the boys to music. And then both my older brothers were into progressive and hard rock and got me exposed to all the good stuff when I was young. So I consider music really the first love and passion.
And tell me a little bit about your time in the music industry before you got into what you're doing now.
I worked for a large music and video distributor from 1988 through 1995 called the Handelman Company, which was a large music and video wholesaler, retailer. And I covered their West Coast operations as a district manager, covering California, Washington, and Hawaii. And then I moved back to Colorado and started my own record company / production, distribution, one-stop shop in 1995, and ran that for about 15, 16 years before I then pivoted into the hemp industry.
And part of what you were doing with that record label, right, was sort of creating merchandise and doing some like industrial product creation. Is that right? How did that sort of inform how you ended up where you are now?
So one of the big things that I was doing was CD and DVD manufacturing and packaging. Did a lot of print work, did a lot of posters, a lot of t-shirts, a lot of hats. And I did do some hemp shirts and hemp hats for a couple of bands and labels back in the late 90s. But I would say more than anything, what it did between when I worked for the large music and video distributor and then when I was running Happy Scratch Records and pressing all these CDs, a lot of this stuff ended up in the landfill when you have all these excess CDs. And really, I had kind of this come to Jesus moment for the amount of waste that I felt personally responsible for throwing into landfills, that being jewel cases, also books. When I worked for the Handelman Company, we also supplied books to a variety of different accounts. And when you had to pull the books off the shelf, basically what you would do is you would pull the cover off and you would throw the book away and then you would ship the covers back to the publisher. So all of these books would end up in dumpsters behind Kmart's and Walmart's and Sears and Ward's and all these kind of big box retail stores. And I just felt guilty for all the stuff that I'd thrown in the landfill and my contribution to, you know, the crap that, again, goes into the landfill.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So where did you then get turned on to hemp and the possibilities that represented?
Well, back in 1995, when I moved back to Colorado and started Happy Scratch, there was a store in Colorado called The Emperor Wears No Clothes, which was a little hemp clothing shop, and they had lotions and soaps, and I ended up reading the Jack Herer book there, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, which the store was named after. So I did find out really kind of in the mid 90s all these different things that hemp could do. And while I wasn't really a hempster at that time, like I said before, I did run some shirts and hats. It did make me start thinking about, wow, hemp it's a pretty cool crop that can do all these different things that corn and soy and petroleum and timber, and it can replace a lot of these resources that are pretty hard on the environment. So it was one of those things that was always kind of in the back of my mind. And the medical marijuana thing started happening here in Colorado really strong in like 2009, 2010. And the music business at that time was going south. Physical media, which was a big part of my business, was getting killed by the internet with iTunes and Amazon. And prior to that, it was really Napster and mp3.com, and then all these pirate sites like Pirate Bay and Demonoid, and places where you could go peer to peer and basically download entire discographies for bands. And it really hit the music business hard. So I was looking for a place to pivot. And in 2012, Colorado put Amendment 64 on the ballot to legalize adult use. And along with that, in that particular piece of legislation, there was the opportunity for farmers to start growing hemp in Colorado before the 2014 Farm Bill. And it was at that time that I talked to a good friend of mine, Elizabeth Knight, and said, hey, you want to start a hemp company? And I was trying to transition out of the music industry, but yet still have access to the music industry and be able to tie that in with what I wanted to do in the hemp industry. So we started Colorado Hemp Company in 2012, really as a merchandise company doing T-shirts and hats. And we started working with a couple other hemp companies that were out there to rep their products to local stores here. And that was Wicked Hemp Footwear, who were making hemp shoes at the time, Hempies, who was making hemp hats and wallets and beanies and doing some cordage and a variety of other kind of textile products. And then another company called Hemp Mania that was doing some of the similar stuff that Hempies was. They had wallets and bags and backpacks and duffel bags and that sort of thing. And that was really the pivot into the hemp industry in 2012.
You have multiple different companies that do different things with hemp, but one of those is Silver Mountain Hemp Guitars. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the hemp guitar thing really started when we started NOCO Hemp Expo in 2014, and I was looking for companies to participate in NOCO. One company I did find that was out there was Canadian Hemp Guitars, who I believe started in 2013. And I reached out to those guys, and they, at the time, were making these prototype guitars and then eventually some ukuleles. And I asked those guys, after buying a couple of their guitars, if they would white label or private label making guitars for me. So we came up with an arrangement, and they built me 3 or 4 different guitars under the Silver Mountain moniker. I got a SG, and I got a couple of Telecasters. And then, and I've actually got another SG that's not finished to theirs. But there was some production issues with getting those guys to manufacture enough guitars for me. And so what happened before the current state of guitars is I hooked up with this group out of Atlanta called the French Brothers, who were making guitar cabinets for a company called Hard Truckers. And at one point, these guys made some hemp guitar cabinets. I think it was in 2008, 2009, using a hemp board, kind of a hemp particle board that was brought in from Asia. And then they couldn't get that board anymore, at least in a board that was consistent, because it was like a 3/4 inch board, and then it was like a millimeter off or a couple millimeters off, and it just wasn't a consistent cut of the board so they could make good quality guitar cabinets. Well, we finally got a board producer here in the United States, and I had those guys start building me some guitar cabinets. as well as putting hemp cone speakers in there from Tone Tubby. And Tone Tubby is a company out of California that's been making hemp cone speakers for 20 years. So these guys started building me some guitar cabinets. And then we started talking about building guitars. And at that time, there was a company that came out, and I believe they came out in 2018. It's a company called Hempwood, and that's hempwood.com. And they're a company out of Kentucky that's making pressed hemp wood that's super cool that you can use in cabinetry and flooring and furniture. And we've now built 3 guitars out of this hemp wood, as well as using a hemp particle board that we use on the guitar cabinets. So the entire body at this point for the guitars is made out of 100% hemp.
First of all, that's really cool, but hemp can be used to make so many things like plastic, building products, wood, paper, even vehicle components. And that's why you're able to make these guitars. What are some of the most exciting uses for hemp that you've seen? And what are some things that, you'd like to see more of?
Well, if you've got an idea for a product, most likely there can be a hemp component to it or hemp ingredient. So that's a great thing about hemp is you can really put it into almost anything, from clothing to the walls that are at your house or at your business, to the paint that's on your walls, to automobiles. From the outside body itself, there's a gentleman called Bruce Dietzen who's got Renew Autosports, who's built a couple of vehicles out of hemp now. And then there's a lot of major car manufacturers, particularly in Europe, that are using interior paneling out of a hemp flax composite. So the interior car panels, as well as a lot of the trim and even the upholstery, is being made out of hemp fabric. So, that's all super cool. I think the building materials, there's a great opportunity in the market to really start converting a lot of the maybe more toxic materials that have to ship all over the world, that leave a high carbon footprint, to where we can be growing a lot of those materials more regionalized, or at least domestically, so they don't have to ship across the world. So I think there's a lot of potential with that. And I'm really hopeful that we can start replacing petroleum plastics and petroleum chemicals with bio-based materials, and particularly hemp. I think hemp lends itself real well to being a plastic or a composite replacement.
And of course, all of the things that we've been talking about are still things. So how does hemp solve in some ways, or help to solve, that problem that you spoke about before of waste?
Well, a lot of that waste ends up in landfills, and then it doesn't degrade very well. It could take thousands and thousands of years. I mean, I don't know the exact amount of time it takes for a piece of plastic to finally break down, but at least with bioplastic, if it's biodegradable plastic, then that can be shortened to months or a few years, rather than thousands of years, where it's going to continue to sit there and not break down and contaminate the ground that it's in. I also think that being able to grow this crop, and you don't have to use the amount of herbicides or pesticides or chemicals to grow it, typically, not that it's not without having to use anything, but it does grow organically more easily, and it fits into this regenerative model that's becoming more popular about rebuilding the soil, because our topsoil and the soil itself is, I believe, it's about a third of the way gone across the planet right now. And not that it can't come back. And I do want to mention, because I'm kind of on this kick right now, there's a movie that just came out called Kiss the Ground. It's on Netflix now, and I highly recommend everybody watch it, because there are solutions to climate change, and fixing our soil is one of them. And I think hemp is a component of that.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that, because is it true that industrial agriculture and construction actually are two of the largest drivers of climate change?
Yes, for sure. Petroleum's not the only bad guy out there. The building industry and industrial agriculture, particularly the way with beef production and then having to grow corn and soy, which is GMO and sprayed with lots of chemicals, that whole process is very detrimental to our environment.
You mentioned building materials, and if anybody's listening to this and is kind of new to that concept, we did an interview with Dion Margraf, who is an advocate for hempcrete, and it's really, really interesting. I definitely recommend listening to that. But hemp is used pretty regularly in China and Europe. I know it's a kind of a big question, but not so much what are the historic roadblocks to using hemp, but maybe why aren't we using hemp more now?
Well, we've still got hemp just became legal in 2018, officially being signed off with Trump and the Farm Bill. But there's still a regulatory issue with the FDA and the USDA. The regulatory process is not set in stone. And thus, there's infrastructure and investment that has yet to come into the marketplace, and particularly on the fiber side. The CBD and extract and cannabinoid supplement side has blown up and is driving the market, although it's definitely held up because of the FDA, and they still say it's not a dietary supplement. It's not considered a food ingredient. That's all going to change here in the next year to 2 years, as well as the USDA, and just a lot of clarification is going to come. But when it comes to building materials, and I'm glad that you had Dion on. Dion is a great guy, super smart.
Yeah.
I'm sure he recommended checking out the U.S. Hemp Building Association, which is ushba.org. And a lot of great people involved with that organization. And again, thumbs up to Dion. He's been a trooper and a pioneer for 30 years out there. And I have tremendous respect for Dion. And people should go back and listen to your interview with Dion, because he can talk about hemp building materials better than I can. I'm really more a promoter of all things hemp and a promoter of the plant and the planet. And people like Dion and the U.S. Hemp Building Association or the U.S. Hemp Growers Association. There's good associations out there where people can get together and learn from each other and help drive this industry forward.
Yeah, and so, Dion's organization, a big part of what they're doing is exactly what you talked about, which is helping to kind of do the safety testing that is necessary to create the regulations that will make large companies feel comfortable using these products. And that's a process. But tell me a little bit about We Are for Better Alternatives, or Wafba, and kind of your approach to advocating for hemp.
So We Are for Better Alternatives is an umbrella of the brands that we've created. When we started this, we started Colorado Hemp Company in 2012. Then we started a hemp paper company in 2013 called Tree Free Hemp, which we use a hemp blended paper that's made from 25% hemp fiber and 75% post-consumer recycled materials. Then we started NOCO Hemp Expo, which has become kind of the big driver of Wafba. And we started that in 2014, and it's become the largest hemp expo and conference in the world. And then in 2015, we started Wafba to kind of hold all of these brands that we were developing. And since then, we've added several more. We've added Silver Mountain Hemp Guitars. We've added Let's Talk Hemp, which is a media platform that we put out industry news and information. We also utilize that platform for doing our programming and education at our events. We also have OnePlanetHemp.com, which is our hemp merchandise store that was really kind of where Colorado Hemp Company started off in 2012. This is where we have all of our T-shirts and our hats and our posters, and it's our merch store. So, and all of that falls under We Are for Better Alternatives, and We Are for Better Alternatives goes beyond hemp too, because hemp's a great alternative, but it's not the only one. It's an alternative that I think will help provide a platform for, like I said before, regenerative agriculture that's now starting to become a hot topic. When we grow corn and soy and monocrop this and spray this and destroy our soils because of monocropping, which is just an agricultural problem that we have, I think hemp is going to provide an opportunity to start these discussions or help these discussions along. How can we start rotating other crops and creating more biodiversity and becoming soil farmers? So I think hemp plays a role not only in the actual rotation part of it, but as a platform and as a talking point and a media point, because people are talking about hemp out there. They're talking about cannabis and cannabis legalization. And what's the difference between marijuana and hemp? It's all cannabis, but one is high THC and can get you stoned and intoxicated, and the other one is not, but it can provide you nourishment and health, and it can also do all these other things from building materials and plastics and clothing and paper and packaging and cleaning up the soil and sequestering carbon.
And I've heard you say that you hope that hemp will become a steward of agriculture. Is that kind of what you're talking about? That hopefully, as this industry starts to grow, people will put some of those better farming practices in place? Absolutely.
There's no doubt about it that hemp can be a leading steward of agriculture and help traditional, conventional farmers that these guys are just trying to make a living and they haven't really thought about the process. And it's like, hey, farm subsidies, we put the corn in the ground, we're going to make money whether it goes to market or not. And the way we've done this over the course of the last 20 or 30 years, it's not sustainable. And we have to get farmers thinking about farming their soil and rotating their crops. And we have to look at our entire food system and how are we going to make this work so we can grow healthy food for generations to come. Because if we don't make some fundamental changes in the way we grow our food, our society is going to have incredibly difficult times in the years ahead.
And for people who are on board, what can they do to help make that a reality?
I think it's really important if people vote with their wallet and support companies that do things that speak to social change and they put their money where their mouth is. Are they organic? Are they certified USD organic? What kind of farming practices are they doing? Are they participating in their local communities? So I think if you're voting with your wallet and supporting companies that are out there really fighting for the right change, then you're definitely doing something that's going to have a difference and make an impact.
Morris Beegle is the president and co-founder of Wafba. We are for better alternatives. Morris, thank you so much for joining me.
I appreciate you having me on, Jesse.
You can find more cannabis industry reporting at TRICHOMES.com, as well as more great shows like this one. If you're a member of the cannabis community and you have a story you want to share with us, reach out. You can reach the show at highground at TRICHOMES.com. Please take a second to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. It really helps others find the show. You can also join the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at TRICHOMES.com and following us on all social media. The show is produced by David Fortin. I'm Jesse Batend, and thank you for listening.